And so with that, we'll kind of get into what you all came here for today, which is the second part of our three-part series, which is building a PC. So last time we figured out like what all the components are and kind of how they work. This time we're actually going to pick the parts to build our PC. This will be interactive. So if you can like pull up chat, that would be great. And I'll tell you kind of how we're going to do that. And then our next meeting in 2 weeks will be actually building the PC. So that's going to be really exciting. And another fun fact is that this PC that we build will be given away to a dues paying member of ACM. And the way that you get entered into a chance to get this is that you just come and you sign into meetings. So there will be a sign in at the end of the meeting. So this will already, get you towards that. So just keep coming to ACM meetings and you will have a higher chance to win this PC. So in this one, we will be picking all of the parts. So last time we went over an overview of the different components in a PC. And the reason that these three are on the other side is because we are not going to be like buying these parts. We're just going to be buying all of the stuff that will be in the case. So these are the things that you can look forward to us picking out today. All right, so I have a challenge for you all because, this is a student organization. We're on a budget. So let's see if we can pick all of these parts for a budget of $700. And you might be thinking that, oh, like maybe that's not a lot, but we'll see how far we can stretch it and what kind of a system we can come up with. And I do want to preface this with, because of the timing of it all, we have ordered parts. So we'll just see if your votes match up with what we ordered or not. So don't come at me for the parts we ordered. There's definitely something we built something good. So but it is already ordered, but you get a chance to see kind of our thought process in picking parts. So how did we go about choosing these parts? So there's this great site called PC Part Picker, and it has like 4 different kind of like sections within the site. So there's a section for the system builder, which it allows you to pick all of your parts. So it'll show up like on the left-hand side of the screen with like CPU, memory, storage, all of that stuff that we went over in the last video and all the stuff that we'll be going by those categories today. Yeah, Zach just dropped the link in the chat. And so a great thing about PC Part Picker is it also makes sure that your build is compatible. So it'll like show up with a green little bar at the top if it's compatible, and we'll see our finalized list. And it also gives you links to where you can buy your parts. So that's really cool. It also has build guides, which are packages that are priced out at different price points, and they already have all of the parts that you're going to need. And you can just buy one of those packages, and then that way you get it and it's going to work and you can complete your first build that way. And then people also sell their completed builds on this site, and you can browse a full list of products by each PC component. And they will give you things like ratings and links to buy them. And also a really cool feature is it'll give you like the price over time. So PC Part Picker is definitely a great site to use, and we used it extensively in picking out this PC. Another thing you might be familiar with is Reddit. So Reddit actually has a whole community for building PCs. And so again, with these sites, PC Part Picker is reliable. And then Reddit, I'm gonna assume, if the mods do a good job and everything, it'll be reliable, but just take whatever you hear with a grain of salt. We'll also be looking at this other site that I wouldn't recommend you go to, but it just worked for a good visual. And so I'll explain when we get to that part, but there's a lot of resources out there. You can also follow YouTube tutorials and stuff like that. But mainly how we chose our parts was like going to YouTube, like researching different PCs, and then going to PC Part Picker and having that help us out with the compatibility stuff. All right, So if y'all are ready, we are going to start picking our parts. And so what we're going to start with is the graphics card. And this is because if you'll remember from last time, we talked about two ways for graphics to be processed. So you can have a graphics card, which has its own graphics processor, or you can buy a CPU with integrated graphics. And so we'll get into those two, but that's going to really be at like the core of our build. So first of all, a graphics card, for those of you who are not able to make it to the last video, controls the output and like display of images for your PC. And so what do we want to look for when we're buying a graphics card? So a graphics card has a graphics processing unit. And what we want to look for in this is clock speed. You'll see this measure in hertz. And this is how quick the processing unit can retrieve and interpret instructions. So higher is going to be better because hertz it's the inverse of a second or like a unit of time. So if it's higher, that means that you're going to be able to process more instructions. And then also another metric is like the number of cores. So a core is a smaller processor that makes up the like larger like processing unit. And so more cores means that we can run more tasks at once. All right, and then so for graphics cards, because we're going to talk about graphics cards versus integrated graphics. And so for the graphics card, the current situation is that there is a global semiconductor shortage. And so this affects graphics cards as well. And you can see the effects in the price points and the availability here. And Trey, I see you posted a question. We can get to that kind of at the end if you're okay with that. If you want to answer it now or talked about now, we can do that. Okay, cool. We'll save it for the end. And so the graphics card, there's a shortage out there, and this is due to things like mining, like crypto mining, and then also like tariffs and other things like that. But so you can see the effects in the prices. So we have a relatively new graphics card. It's NVIDIA, and its manufacturer's suggested retail price was $500. And as of March 2021, it is above $1,200. So you can see again in a different brand, a different manufacturer, AMD, their Radeon RX graphics card is again increased over 2 times. And I got these numbers and everything from this article. And yeah, so that's kind of what's going on with graphics cards right now. So they're pretty pricey and kind of hard to find. So what's the alternative to this? Your other option is integrated graphics. And so this means that the GPU is built into the central processing unit. And so this means that both of them are using like the same cores to execute instructions for graphics as well as the rest of your system. So it's slower processing, but we can see that this is a CPU with integrated graphics as denoted by the G, and it's like $285. And then, and this is a 3rd generation, so the most current generation of Ryzen. And we can see that a just normal CPU without the graphics integrated is like $220. So that's kind of like the price points there. Let me reshare this really quick. Okay. And so we can see some like gameplay with integrated graphics. We saw this one last time where Cyberpunk kind of lags out because it's Cyberpunk. But we can see other games like Fortnite, you know, they get up to that like 60 FPS, which is good. So integrated graphics, not horrible, but maybe not the gaming intensive type of thing. All right. So now what I'm going to ask you to do when we come across all of these decisions is I'm going to go through the options, and I want you to save kind of like what your pick is going to be. And then we're going to do something called a waterfall chat. So everybody, you're going to like type down your pick, but don't hit enter. And then all at once, we're going to hit enter and we're going to see, you know, kind of what everybody chose at once. So I will go ahead and discuss the two options for graphics. So a graphics card or integrated graphics. So again, our budget is $700. And so we have the Asus GeForce GT 1030 2GB Phoenix Fan OC video card. And so just some of the specs on this are that it has 2 GB of memory. We talked about the clock speed. It has almost 1300 megahertz core clock speed. And then we have 384 cores. And on the flip side, we have integrated graphics, which is built into the CPU. So Ryzen, this particular one uses the Vega 11 graphics, and it also has 2 GB of memory. It has a faster clock speed, so it's 1400 megahertz, and that's just for the graphics frequency. And then it has a lot less cores, but it's a lot less expensive as well. So everybody go ahead and type whether type card if you're for the GeForce GT, and then type integrated if you're for the integrated graphics. Again, we have $700 to spend, so keep that in mind. And these are the specs for it, and we'll see if you chose the same thing that we did. So everybody make sure to have that ready now. And I'll give you like 10 more seconds to think on it and type it in. All right, cool. Everybody hit enter. Let's see what everybody picked. Ooh, okay. So the people at the start said integrated. We're pretty split, integrated versus card. All right, so I'll go ahead and show you what we chose, and I'll kind of explain why. So we chose the integrated graphics because we felt like we could build a better system just from doing integrated graphics, instead of trying to scrounge around and get a graphics card that was an older generation, and then also still costed a lot. So now this begs the question, how much money do we have remaining? And we don't really know, because we haven't really chosen anything yet, because we chose integrated graphics, which means that what we build with is going to depend on the CPU. So we'll go ahead and choose that next. So the CPU, if you didn't make it to the video 2 weeks ago, Trey's right. The benefit is that you can upgrade with the GPU later. And again, that was something that went into our decision, is we wanted to give you a build that functioned, but maybe something that if you wanted to add to, totally can. So central processing unit receives and executes instructions. So again, what do we look for in a CPU? Well, it's similar to a GPU in that we look for clock speed and the amount of cores, because it is a processing unit. And then something you also might see here is thread count. So a thread is a unit of execution inside of a core. And what this means is that you can just run two different kind of, like, I guess I'll say strands, because it's a thread, but you can run like two different like sequences of execution inside a core, because your core can have up to 2 threads. And so this just means that you have more concurrent execution the more cores and threads that you have. All right, so we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the processing units that you might have seen, specifically the cores. So we have 2 big brands, Intel and then AMD Ryzen. And so I wanted to kind of clarify some of this notation, because you might have seen like i3, i5, i7, i9, or for Ryzen 3, 5, 7, and 9. And you might be saying like, well, what does that mean? Well, these numbers actually indicate the relative processing power. These are not the number of cores, and they're not the generation. You can see here that we have 10th generation Intel, which is the most current generation, and it's in all of the different like stages of relative processing power. So 7 is going to be better than 5 in terms of processing power, and then a 9 will be better than 7. But the generations, what dictates those is just like a generation of an iPhone. Something that comes out that has a substantial improvement is classified as like a new generation. So just so that you know what that means. that's kind of how you read those. So you'll see that come up in the names when we get to those. All right, so now we're gonna compare some CPUs. And again, I said that there's two kind of like big brands. There's the AMD Ryzen and then also Intel. And AMD is the manufacturer and Ryzen is like the model. So we'll start with the Ryzen. So it is a Ryzen 5 3400 G 4-core 8-thread 3.7 gigahertz desktop processor with Radeon RX graphics. And then the thing that we're comparing it to is going to be the Intel Core i5 10400 10th generation 6-core 12-thread 2.9 gigahertz. And then this at the end, you don't have to worry about that. But these are the two things. So if we look at comparing these, something that's going to be important in our comparison is graphics, because we said we want integrated graphics, right? We're not going to have a graphics card. So the Ryzen has Vega 11 graphics, and then the Intel Core has Intel UHD graphics, and we will compare those here in a second at this link. But we can see here, this is the clock speed. So it says 3.7 gigahertz versus 2.9 gigahertz. So the Ryzen is significantly faster with its clock speed, but it does have less cores and threads. So it has less opportunity for that parallel execution, whereas you have like 6 cores and 12 threads over here, because each core has 2 threads in it. So let's go ahead and compare graphics. This is the site that I was talking about earlier, which I was like, I don't know. I wouldn't personally trust this. I wouldn't go to this as your first choice, right? So I would back this up with something else, but I think it does a good job of showing the graphics comparison here. So we have Intel graphics, and then we have the Ryzen AMD graphics. And so they're both released in 2017. But we see kind of their speed. So this is based on benchmarks that this site did independently. So again, take this with a grain of salt, please. But according to the site, it says that the graphics for AMD are much better than Intel. And that's something that you can cross-check online. You can go ahead and go online and search up these two different products, and then also search up the companies and see their comparison. But largely, the conclusion is that graphics are going to be better on Ryzen. You see that the Intel graphics do win some categories, but we see here on these games frames per second, like 50 frames per second and 80 frames per second, versus with the Ryzen, we get 73 and 89 frames per second. So we have a little bit of improvement there. And then they have some other things like market share, which we're not really going to care about as much. But the gist between these two, somebody wrote that this is the most powerful iGPU for desktop. Again, this is a site that's like third party, but also Intel, it's good to give them some credit here, because it's decent gaming, right? We're getting 50 frames per second and 80 frames per second. So that's not too terrible at all. All right. So now that you've seen that comparison and you've seen the differences between these two, go ahead and type in either type in Ryzen or Intel for the CPU that we're going to get. I'll give you like 10 seconds to decide. And then we'll go ahead. And everybody go ahead and submit your choice, Ryzen or Intel. We got some Intel fans. Zach was really excited to vote for Ryzen, so that's cool. Because yeah, I'll go ahead and let you in on a little secret. We chose Ryzen, and that is just because of its graphics capabilities, because we knew that we were sacrificing a little bit when we went for integrated graphics. So we wanted to go ahead and leverage Ryzen for that. So now the next question is like, what level of like relative processing power do we get? Do we get a Ryzen 3? Do we get a Ryzen 5? Is this price difference worth it? And then Ryzen 7 and 9, when I looked them up, they didn't offer anything with integrated graphics because they have higher processing power, so they would probably assume that you're making a like bulkier build and stuff like that. So, but just comparing these two, so we see the Ryzen 3 has slightly lower clock speed than the Ryzen 5. They both have 4 cores. And then we'll go ahead and jump to this comparison here. Again, the site, take it with a grain of salt, please. But we have their performance metrics. So we see that Ryzen 3, since it is that lower processing, it suffers a little bit on the workstation by like 8%. And then gaming, it's just a small difference. And then desktop is also a small difference. So we can like look through here. This effective speed was really what I wanted you all to look at. But we see since Ryzen 5 is that higher relative processing power, it is going to be better. So I want you to keep in mind that we have a $700 budget. We didn't spend anything on a graphics card because we're buying integrated graphics. So what do you all think? Do we spend like $280 on Ryzen 5, or do we go $180 for the Ryzen 3? So everybody go ahead and type that into the chat. And then I'll give you a couple more seconds. And just to put this in perspective, we have all of those other parts to go, but the processing units are kind of like the meat of what you buy for a PC. So keep that in mind when you're making your choice. But everyone go ahead, let us know your answers. Everybody wants the 5. We got a 3 in there. Go for the 3. No, definitely not. Oops. It's just preference, and again, you pick what you want to build. But we did go for the Ryzen 5 because we sacrificed a little bit on that graphics card, so we just wanted to get as up to date or as much processing power as we could out of our CPU. And I just wanted to show this here to kind of show you how to read some of these names so that when they come up later, this is not going to be for all of them, but just so that when they come up later, you can kind of see, oh, like that's where that number comes from or stuff like that. So AMD Ryzen, that's a manufacturer model. 5, we talked about relative processing power. I mentioned that Ryzen is on its 3rd generation, so that's where this 3 out front comes from. And then G indicates integrated graphics. And then this is the clock speed. And then we have quad core, which means that there are 4 cores. So with that, we have about $400 remaining. So let's go ahead and move on. All right, so the motherboard. The motherboard is the piece of our PC that everything is going to snap into, connect into. It's going to kind of hold it together. So we have different form factors that we can choose from when choosing motherboards. We can choose from an ATX, a micro ATX, or a mini ITX. And the difference here is size, which also means you can fit less things on a mini ITX than you could a micro ATX. So I think we'll go ahead and go into a little bit more depth here. So an ATX would be good for building a very powerful machine. You're going to need a big case because it's going to be like 12 inches by 9 inches. It's, I think, roughly the size. You can connect 4 slots of RAM, multiple graphics cards, and mini solid state drives. A micro ATX is going to be your more affordable option, but it does offer less in terms of expansion because depending on the micro ATX, you can connect either like 2 or 4 RAM, 1 graphics card, and then SSDs. And then the mini ITX is meant for compact PC systems. And in some cases, it can be more expensive than micro. So you can connect up to 2 RAM slots, but this is really awesome for systems that you want to be compact in size and have like one very specific purpose. So go ahead, type in chat. Do you think we should go for ATX, micro ATX, or mini ITX? And then I'll give you like 10 seconds and we'll hit enter. All right, let's see what y'all chose. We got micro, we got some ATX. Micro with a bunch of O's, I like it. All right. So what we went with was the micro ATX. And this is because, as you see on this slide, we're not concerned with multiple graphics cards, right? We don't even have one. So even if somebody wanted to expand, then we'll go for just getting one in the first place. And then again, we can still get up to 4 RAM slots with both of these, depending on the ones that you pick. So we went with micro. So let's see, when choosing our brand for motherboards, what do we need to kind of be conscious of to make sure that everything is compatible? So we decided on a micro ATX, but we also chose our CPU, which is basically going to like snap into the motherboard. And this snaps in through a socket on the motherboard. And so we need to make sure that the socket is compatible with our CPU so that we don't get a CPU and a motherboard that can't interface with each other. And so the most common things to look out for, and it'll tell you this on PC Part Picker, or if you just Google what is compatible with this type of CPU, it'll tell you kind of like the most common chipsets that you're going to want to look for on the motherboards for that CPU to snap into are the X570, X470, and B450. So now let's go ahead and choose the brand of our motherboard. So just a quick note, motherboards do not affect performance. They do like indirectly because they affect how much you can kind of like plug into your system. So how much RAM you can have, different audio input and output, and then also the number of ports. So, but they don't directly affect performance. There's not one that is going to add a bunch of performance. It'll just add more slots of like RAM or something like that to help performance. So we have the ASRock B450M micro ATX AM4 motherboard. And then this is versus the Gigabyte B450M V2 micro ATX AM4 motherboard. And so comparing these side by side, they're both $80. So that just kind of levels that playing field right away, because I think we have about $400 left to spend. This is going to be a newer product, but it has 2 slots for RAM, whereas this motherboard has 4 slots of RAM. And thus, this supports a total of 32 gigabytes of RAM, whereas this, because of its additional slots, supports 64. And then the difference here, the only other difference I could really find was the difference in like audio jacks. So this one, you get HD audio, this one you don't. So again, this is kind of minor differences, but these are just two products that are out there. So go ahead, either type ASRock or Gigabyte, depending on, you know, do you want more RAM and more room for expansion, or do you just really love that audio? Do you want that HD audio? And they're both $80. All right, I hope everyone has it typed in. Go ahead and show me ASRock or Gigabyte. All right, it looks like we got a lot of Gigabyte. Yeah, HD audio, you know, for the ASRock, yeah, for sure. But we went ahead and we went with Gigabyte because of the more RAM. We wanted to allow somebody to kind of upgrade if they wanted to. And so that's what we went with. So now we have about $335 remaining. And all right, so next we're going to talk about the RAM, which is the short-term memory. So RAM comes in 6 of, you'll see sizes of like 2 gigabytes, 4 gigabytes, 8 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes, and 32 gigabytes. You don't really see as many 2 gigabytes. But let's see kind of our requirements. So we just got this motherboard. What does this require for our RAM? Because our RAM ultimately is just going to snap into the motherboard. So this requires no more than 64 gigabytes of RAM. So we can't go over that. That would be pretty excessive if we did, but we can't go over that. And then no more than 4 RAM sticks. And then again, another specification that I just found online and also using PC Part Picker is that we need what's called DDR4 RAM. And to be honest, I didn't really look into this as much. I just said, all right, like it's got to have DDR4 in the name. So if you have more questions about that, you can go to Google and I'm sure that'll help you out. Sorry, I can't really elaborate on that. But all right, let's choose our RAM. So these two are going to look very similar, but there's a reason for this choice. So these are the same exact like brand and model of RAM, but one is an option of buying 2 sticks of RAM that are 8 gigabytes each for a total of 16 gigabytes of RAM versus 1 stick of just 16 gigabytes of RAM. So this over here will use 2 RAM slots. So it'll be what we call dual channel, which means that you can just execute different instructions or like access memory from each of them. Whereas if you have one, then you're just going to be going to and from like that one slot of RAM. But this means that it's good for upgrade because if we have 1 stick of 16 gigabytes RAM, we can go ahead and get another stick, 16 gigabyte RAM, and have a lot of RAM. But it takes up less space, right? Whereas if we were just able to settle for 8 gigabytes in all of those spaces. But the bonus of this 2 RAM approach, or the dual RAM approach, is it gives you a performance improvement because, like I said, you can access both of them at the same time because it's 2 sticks of RAM rather than 1. So go ahead, and here we have the price, which is $75 versus $90. So go ahead and in chat, type either 2x8 or 1x16, whether you want the dual RAM for the performance improvement, or whether you want the single stick of RAM because you're like, oh, I want to upgrade. I want to get more of those 16 gigabyte sticks. All right, and everybody, show me what you chose: 2x8 or 1x16. I see a lot of 2x8. I see a couple 1x16. All right. So what we chose is going to be the 2x8, and that's because of the performance improvement that it offers, right? It's not really worth it to just buy 1 16 gigabyte stick of RAM unless you know for a fact you're going to upgrade, and you're just maybe waiting on like that next check or something to come in. So with this in mind, why not just go to 4 sticks of 4 gigabyte RAM instead of 2 sticks of 8 gigabyte RAM, right? Because it seems like we should just keep going till the smallest we can get so that we can run a bunch of stuff parallelly and we'll be great. But what I want to show you is this graph here. And don't pay attention to the bottom part because this is talking about 8 gigabytes of RAM, but we want to talk about the total 16 gigabytes of RAM. So this is what we chose, which is 16 gigabyte dual, which means that there are 2 8 gigabyte RAM sticks. And so we see that this offers an average frames per second of 92.8, I believe. And so if we compare that to what if we go quad? So what if we go to 4 by 4 gigabytes. So if we go to quad, then our frames per second increases to 92.93. So it's not really worth it to go that extra step because the performance is going to decrease, the more that you modularize like that, because you don't want to just have a bunch of two gigabyte sticks of RAM. And then Trey said in the chat, if 1 16 gigabyte RAM stick fails, you're screwed, which is also very true. And still we have room for more upgrades this way because we still have those extra 2 slots of RAM. So this was our winner. It's the 2 8 gigabyte sticks, and that cost us $90. So we have about $250 left to build this PC. All right, now we're going to talk about storage, which is, if you missed the first video, a brief just recap in 1 sentence is the storage is what keeps the data on your computer even when your system is turned off. All right, so I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. I just went ahead and picked the storage. I didn't think it was that exciting to talk about. Maybe you find it really exciting, but I just went ahead and picked it. So based on our motherboard, it says it requires any SATA, M2, or PCIe interface. And so, yes, that's true. Our SSD is going to be better than a hard disk. So I chose an SSD with a SATA interface. And again, I just looked this up. I literally did not know how to build a PC before this. You just have to Google around and see what the motherboard requires. And then PC part picker will make sure that you stay within that. It'll even, block out options that are not compatible. And so I just went ahead and picked 1 terabyte of storage because I'm a movie person. So I like to save big files and stuff like that. And, with 1 terabyte, you're not going to have to worry about those larger files. And so a SATA interface, SSD is an easy and also mainstream option. So that's what I went with. And it cost us about $100. So sorry, I just took $100 of your money. But we got the Crucial VX 500 1 terabyte, 2.5-inch solid state drive. And again, Trey had a good point. So if you want to look into SSD versus HD, then you can go ahead and do that. And you can even look into these different interface types because this M2 interface can be advantageous, but you have to set it up a special way that I wasn't familiar with. So we just went with the mainstream option. All right, now back to you choosing. So the power supply unit. And what the power supply unit does, a lot of people will think, oh, it's like a battery for the PC. Well, really, the power supply unit, all it's doing is taking that power from your wall outlet and converting it into usable voltage and voltage readings so that your PC doesn't fry and it can use the power from your wall outlet. So the power supply unit gives the PC usable power. Some metrics for the power supply unit that we talked about last time that we want to keep in mind here are that we want to supply power at 50% load. So if our system is requiring 600 watts of power, we don't just want a 600 watt power supply. We want to go 2 times that so that we're always operating at 50% load. And this is just something that's standard to do because we don't want to be operating on the max power that we need from our power supply unit because that can just get bad. So how you can figure this out, how much your system requires, is based on a power supply calculator. And this is based on CPU, motherboard, a GPU, RAM, and SSD. And another metric that we want to keep in mind is efficiency. So this means how much of the power that comes out of the wall are you using on your components? So we want a minimum 80% efficiency, which is given to us by this 80 plus rating on our power supplies. And because if it's inefficient, then it'll pull a lot of power from the wall that it doesn't need, and then it'll heat up your system and also raise your power bill. So 80 plus is just a good standard to keep. And within this 80 plus, there's bronze, silver, and gold tiers, which get better and better as they go 82% efficiency, all the way up to 90% efficiency. All right, so what I want you to do, if you're able, is go to this link here. I will actually also provide it in chat. Sorry, I didn't have this link ready, but we will. So either scan it on your phone or go to this link, and this is a power supply calculator. So I mentioned that we want to be operating at 50% load. So let's go ahead and see how much power we're going to need, and do not shout it out in chat because this is going to impact your decision, and we'll see if you calculated it right based on your decision. So when you get to that site, you'll see fields to enter the CPU, motherboard, maybe a graphics card or GPU, which we didn't get, and then RAM and SSD. So I've provided the specs here. So our CPU is AMD Ryzen 3400G. The motherboard is a micro ATX. Our RAM is 2 8GB sticks of DDR4 RAM. And our storage is a solid state drive that is 1 terabyte. And so while you're entering that in, I'll just talk a little bit about what else we need. So we need to make sure that our power supply unit is compatible with the form factor of our motherboard. So since we chose a micro ATX, that's something that we're going to watch out for when buying a power supply unit. So if you still haven't entered these, let me know and I can give you another second. But otherwise, I think I'm going to move on, and you can use the calculation you get to decide what power supply we're going to buy. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to assume everyone's caught up to speed. All right, so I've offered you two options. They're both 80 plus bronze certified, so they both have the efficiency. The coolest looking one. Yeah, this one draws eyes right away. But the difference here that I want you to notice is the wattage. So we said that we want to be operating at 50% load. So whatever the required wattage that you got from that power supply calculator, what is the minimum number of wattage that we would need for that to be half? So go ahead and multiply that by 2. Both of them are semi-modular. And this one costs a little bit more because it's extra watts. So do we need 1,000 watts? Is our PC taking up 500 watts of power, or are we good with 500 watts? So let's see. And then I want you to go ahead and type into the chat either 1050 watts or 500 watts based on what power supply you all want to get. And go ahead and wait for a little bit. I'll give everybody a chance to do that. All right, and let's see what you came up with. 500. Nice. Yes. So I think you all should have gotten about 150 watts for the power that we require. So 500 is going to be totally more than enough. We don't need to spend this extra $30 on 1,000 watts when we're only going to be using 300 to operate at 50%. So yep, this is what won. And we have $75 remaining. So we're getting down to the end here. All right, cooling. So we talked about cooling, how you can have like liquid cooling, you can have fans, and this is all to help regulate the temperature of the PC. Heat sinks are also a form of cooling that comes like in your motherboard and stuff like that. But again, I chose for you here. I didn't let you choose because our CPU, it comes with a fan. So that's something that I didn't know when ordering CPUs, is that they'll usually come with a fan that can just cool by the CPU directly. And so this is going to be enough for what we want to do now. And Trey's right, more fans can be added later. And it is less fun to look at fans. So let's go ahead and move on to the case. Let's choose a case. That will probably be more fun than looking at fans. So a case, we talked about how it's used because of protection from like dust, and it provides ventilation depending on how you set your case up, but it's also just something to kind of make your build look cool and look how you want it to look. So we have $75 left, so we're on a budget for sure, but let's go ahead and see our case options. Oh, but before that, let's see what we need. So we need our case to fit a 9.6 inch by 9.6 inch motherboard because we chose that micro ATX, which is smaller. We also need room for airflow and other components. And so when typing this into Google, like what case fits a micro ATX motherboard, it comes up with mid tower. So it says, all right, we need about a mid tower case so that it's not completely drowning in the case and there's a bunch of empty space, and also our component will fit. So we'll be looking for mid tower. And then the other thing that depends on the case is, of course, stuff like ventilation and stuff like that. But really, this is just your chance to do whatever you want. There's probably a case out there for whatever you want to do. So let's go ahead and we'll look at two cases in our price range. So they're both Cooler Master brand. But we have the MB311L versus the NR400, and they're both micro ATX mid-tower cases. They both have a tempered glass side panel. And then another thing to look for in your cases is to see where the power supply is going to be mounted. Most cases it'll be at the bottom, and that's kind of what I gravitate towards. But you'll see that some cases might mount the power supply in other places, but I would just go for the ones that mount it at the bottom of the case. They both say that they have good ventilation with this like mesh sort of thing that you see here. This one's $70 and this one's $65, and this one has RGB. I tried to find more cases in the budget, and these were the two that really popped up. So go ahead and either type MB311L or NR400 in the chat and wait to send it. And we'll see what case we're feeling. And if we're on different sides of this, I don't know. I think this one will be a landslide, hopefully. But All right, everybody go ahead, tell me what case. Yeah, we have people who like the RGB. Oh, we have some that like the sleek, just like black design. That's good. I'm a fan of the RGB just because that's me. And I got to pick parts. So I went ahead and did the RGB, which leaves us with a whole $10 remaining. So we did it. We picked our parts for our PC for the build, and our build is going to be ready to be purchased. So just to recap and see what we did with our past 50 minutes, we needed to choose a CPU, motherboard, memory, storage, GPU, power supply, cooling, and a case. And we had to do all of this in only $700. And so here, it might be a little bit small. The budget did not include shipping costs, but you'll see here that I was a little bit generous in my estimates. So what it came out to on PC Part Picker, this is what that system builder page looks like. And I just filled everything in. It gives us prices. And so what this came out to is about $680, which gives us some room, a little bit of room for shipping, depending on how long you want to wait. But these are all of our parts. We chose integrated graphics with the Ryzen 5 3400G. We chose a gigabyte motherboard. We chose 2 8GB sticks of RAM, a solid state drive, which I chose, and then our power supply and our case. So that is our whole build. So I just want to thank you all for kind of joining me in this build. And before we go any further, because there's just some announcements and then questions and stuff like that to get to, I want to give you the opportunity to sign in, because signing in is how you're going to get a chance to win this system, because we're actually going to build this in 2 weeks. So this PC will be given away at the end of the semester to a dues paying ACM member. I think Jonathan dropped the link in the chat way before. I don't know if you still have that link up, but to pay your member dues. And then Tiva, she's awesome. She dropped the sign-in link if you can't scan the QR code. And so the things that you have to do is pay your member dues and the link that Zach just sent, and then also sign into meetings, and you'll increase your chances to win. So the link is going to be in the description, which is what Tiva put there. So I'm gonna go ahead and move. And I know Trey had a question at the very beginning. I'll try to scroll up in chat. I think it was something about overclocking, which, let's see. Yeah. Let me try to find this question. Sorry, Trey, I should have. Okay. What are your opinions on finding a graphics card or CPU that can be overclocked? So for me, I will be straight up honest with you all. This is my first time building a PC too. I didn't really look into overclocking, although I saw, that was a term that comes up, and that's pretty important. But I just wanted to go for the vanilla build. And so personally, I would, just because I don't know much about how to manipulate a CPU in that way, which overclocking has something to do with increasing the clock speed. So the base clock speed was what we saw in the megahertz or gigahertz, but overclocking, you increase that clock speed. Again, I'm not too familiar with that. If anybody has any advice or tips on that, feel free to drop it in the chat. But that's a good question, and that's a good option to bring up. Is that besides a GPU, you could overclock your CPU. But personally, I would just go for the easiest thing, which is I'll just buy a GPU. So maybe not now because of the shortage, but yeah, that is kind of my personal ramblings on it for a little bit. And if there are any more questions, feel free to unmute or drop them in the chat. And then I just want to make a couple of announcements though. Next, for the series in 2 weeks, we will actually be building the PC. So we will have all of the parts. You'll get to see how it's assembled. So make sure to come out and just hang with us, just check it out. It's going to be really chill. It's a lot of us, we've never like built a PC or done anything like that before. I haven't. So it's going to be really chill. Come out, hang out with us. We'll chill and we'll build a PC together. And then, but first, before that, because that's in 2 weeks, next week, we have a really special intro to tech meeting. We have ACM's faculty advisor, Dr. Mark Robinson, is going to come and give a workshop on writing clean code. And so this is something that I'm for sure going to go to. His description was really great. If you are embarrassed to show your code to somebody, if you know it looks like a mess, go ahead and go to this workshop and get that fixed. He'll show you how you should be kind of coding and the different standards for clean code versus dirty or messy code. And then we have some more events here that Vanessa touched on earlier. So we have ACM-W tomorrow are going to be having a meeting with Youth Code Jam, which is a nonprofit in Texas that helps teach kids to code for affordable rates. And so we volunteered our time there because their jams are, just anybody who wants to learn how to code can get into them usually. And so we volunteered our time there as ACM last fall. So it'd be really awesome to come out and hear a little bit more about how maybe you can get involved or just hear about what they do tomorrow. And then day after tomorrow, we're going to have a social. That'll be at 5:15. Make sure to look in the Discord for more announcements about that. And then this Saturday will be ICPC. And then I'm going to go ahead, and if you all want to take a look at it, I do have the link for the build that we did. And I'll go ahead and drop that in chat as well. If you just want to mess around on PC Part Picker a little bit. But yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to stick around. If you need the sign in, let me know. And other than that, we'll see you tomorrow at ACM-W's meeting and then more throughout the week. And don't forget to come back next week for Dr. Mark Robinson's Clean Code Workshop. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.